Good morning, students. Welcome back to this online class. I'm Dr. S. D. Vyas, Assistant Professor, Department of English in Government Dungur College. Nowadays, we are taking grammar. In our last class, we have discussed that grammar is very helpful to understand a language, to use a language, and if we further extend our field of understanding of a language, how a language works can also be understood by studying its grammar. In simple terms, grammar means those rules which are used, which are followed to use a language correctly. It is a common code which is shared by a group, and for this reason, for this sharing, that group can use that language effectively, can understand and communicate successfully. Now, today, our topic is the grammar in prose and poetry. If there is any difference in terms of grammar when we use a language in a prose form or in a poetry form. First of all, what is prose and what is poetry? We understand that poetry has a certain forms in which the expression is colored with imagination and it is emotional. It has its rhythm, its music, its rhyme scheme, the use of figurative language. And prose, we can see the articles in the newspaper, the essay, drama, novels, short story, in which though the imagination plays very important role, but the flight of fancy, the flight of imagination is not so much. Prose is direct and straightforward expression in simple language. In poetry, the expression is in figurative language, and often the meaning which is conveyed by the word itself is not to be taken literally. It has to be taken figuratively. That is the basic difference. We can understand whether something is presented before us. We can identify if it is a poetry or a prose. Now we will discuss in our this class, is there any difference in the application of rules of grammar in writing poetry or in writing prose? So here we start. Grammar can help us to understand the form and meaning of a text. With the help of our vocabulary and our understanding of the structure of the language, the rules of grammar, we can understand. In literature, grammar is shown at its highest level of expression in a poem or in a prose. Literary expression is always, whether it is prose or poetry, it does not make any difference. Its language is different from the ordinary language. The language in literature is different from the language used in ordinary use. The vocabulary and the grammar are used for effective communication of ideas, but more for effective communication of expressions of the life, individual or collective, because literature is the reflection of life in a society. In a prose writing, this effective grammar is performed through parallelism, means the matching of one pattern of words with another pattern. With similarities and dissimilarities, the meaning is derived. So what we find in a prose writing, that sentences are formed following the set pattern, subject followed by helping verb, then main verb, or if it is an interrogative sentence, then the helping verb will precede the subject, and so on. Then reading those lines, we make parallelism, we make comparisons, we find similarities, we find dissimilarities, and then the meaning is, we make the progress in derivation of the meaning. The parallelism are expressed by a similarity in the actual choice and combination of words. The use and the choice means the diction, the choice and combination of words is also similar, because we are to use the words for its literal sense, not for the figurative sense. So it is the actual choice and combination of the words. In the literary writing, every word is in a sentence is balanced significantly against another words. That's why the language in literature gets a special type of beauty because of the form in which it is presented. It is well balanced and loaded with meanings. In prose writing, the order in which words occur is important because sentences exist primarily in tense rather than in space. But sometimes space also becomes important as it is observed that the most important information in a sentence tends to be saved to the end. That is the end weightage doctrine which we have discussed in our steps for good writing. So what this paragraph say? That sentence, the information which is conveyed by sentence is primarily in tense rather than the space. So the important information conveyed to us through a sentence is about the form of the verb, whether it is past tense or present tense, or it is continuous in aspect or it is perfect in aspect. That is the central point or the most effective information in a sentence. The spatial information is not so much necessary, it does not attract our attention so much. In English, the form of the verb is the part on which or through which the most of the information is derived. How sentences are constructed and placed together is also important for effective communication of meaning. We will have to follow the set pattern of writing sentences, and if we deviate from that sentence pattern, we do not have much scope. We cannot deviate too far. It is important to have understanding of the grammatical resources of language and the ways in which they can be exploited. The grammatic resources, how I can express one idea in different forms, how a request can be expressed in different forms, how an order, an explanation, the expression of joy, how these things can be expressed by combining different types of structures of sentence, that should be known to the writer. And the knowledge of the ways, what are the different ways of expressing the same thing, how I can say the same thing, the same meaning using different words, using different structure, sentence patterns, that should be known to the writer also. For example, to live like to love, all reason is against it, all healthy instinct for it, we eat to live, we live to eat. We can understand the differences only by changing the order. To live like to love, if I change it to love like to live, it will make a different sense. Especially focus on this sentence, we eat to live and we live to eat. We can understand the difference, and the writer must know about these things. If I change this word order, the meaning will also be changed in a prose writing. There is some license, there is some allowance in changing the word order in poetry. But in prose, I will have to follow the accepted structures and the likely words which go with that expression. Now we take poetry, verse or poetic form. Even in poetry, grammar is important. We cannot say that poetry allows us to change the word order. Poetry allows us to use language figuratively. But it does not mean that we can do away with our grammatical rules. It is by grammatical choice that the poet is able to express the special meaning which he wants to convey. But certain effects are unique to poetry which are achieved through the poetic license. What is poetic license? Poetic license is the allowance which is given to a poet in use of its language. He is not bound to follow the strict word order in constructing sentences, because sentences are not formed in poetry, lines are formed. Paragraph is not formed in poetry, stanza is formed. And for poetry, the diction is mostly for its music and for its emotional appeal. Poetic license is the deviation from the rules of everyday language. That is poetic license. That the language used in poetry is not as it is used in everyday life. So, poetic license is the deviation from the rules of everyday language. However, the knowledge of those rules is equally important to highlight the deviation and special effects. The special effect which is produced by that deviation by the writer can be conveyed with the same effectiveness or can produce the same effectiveness to the eyes of the reader only if that deviation is identified, is realized by the reader. If the reader is unable to find out, is unable to pick up that deviation, then the effect of that line in poetry will be lost. So again, the not only the knowledge of rules of grammar, but where those rules are deviated, where those rules are violated is also important both for the writer and for the reader to know. Otherwise, the communication of that effectiveness will be lost. So, the knowledge of those rules is equally important to highlight the deviation and the special effect. In poetry, words have special relationship not only for grammatical structure but for similarities for sounds also. The diction, the choice and arrangement of words in a line of poetry is mostly for the music of the poetry, that it should sound melodious to the ears. In poetry, unusual patterns of grammar are found because the word order is changed. This practice of use of words in a stanza way from their expected context give them sorry this practice of use of words in a strange way from their expected context give them abnormal force, that is the poetic joy we can say, or that is the poetic appeal. Generally, a poet changes the form of a word like noun as a verb, verb as an adjective. This type of change a poet can do freely, but that change is not allowed in a prose writing. Poetic use of language involves both extra freedom and extra discipline. It is not that poet is totally free to do whatever he wants with the words. He cannot play lightly with the words. The deviation should be purposeful. Such deviation is not allowed in prose, it is allowed in poetry, but that is not without any restraint. Poetry has its own discipline, and the poet will have to follow that discipline. In other words, in poetry, the meaning is produced by the combination of parallelism, rhyme, and meter. Rhyme and meter are not so much important in a prose form. So, in prose form, the meaning is totally according to the structure and words of the language. So, thus we can say that though there is some relaxation in following the rules of grammar in poetry, in prose we will have to follow those rules more strictly, but some license, some allowance is given to a poet because of the special nature of that way of expression. But it does not mean that grammar is totally absent in poetic form. Grammar is there because, especially the form of verbs, because it tells us about the tense, about the aspect of the work, about the condition of some activity, and that is the most important thing, means the action, the activity which is derived by that, which is derived as a meaning. So, grammar, there is a little change in the little difference in following the rules of grammar, and in poetic form that strictness is not so much, but still the use of word, the use of structure, the use of language is controlled by a special discipline of poetry itself. But grammar, the knowledge of grammar is as much important both to use a language in poetic form or in a prosaic form. So that's all. Thank you, students. Stay safe and secure. Thank you very much.